The morning of my wedding, my mother braided my hair in silence. Not the comfortable kind of silence we shared over bread dough or quilting frames. This was different, tight, sealed, like a door that had been locked from the inside. I was 17 years old, and in a few hours I would stand before the bishop and promise my entire life to a man I had known for less than 6 months. And in that whole morning, with her fingers moving through my hair, her breath warm and steady behind me, my mother said nothing. Not one word about what the night would bring. I kept waiting. I told myself, surely now. Surely before she pins the last section. Surely before she steps back and looks at me in that dress. Surely a mother tells her daughter something. She smoothed the front of my apron, looked at my face, and said, you look plain and right. That was all. My name is Martha. I grew up Old Order Amish in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. I left my community, and this channel is where I finally say the things we were never allowed to speak out loud. If this is your first time here, if something in those first few words made your chest tighten because you recognized it, subscribe, like this video, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss what comes next. These stories cost something to tell. The least they can do is reach the people who need them. Now let me tell you what my mother's silence cost me, and why it almost destroyed my marriage before it had a chance to begin. To understand what Amish girls are never told, you first have to understand how Amish life is designed, because the silence on the wedding night is not an accident. It is not oversight. It is a feature of the system built deliberately into the structure of how we were raised. From the time I was old enough to understand anything, I understood this. The body was not something you discussed. You covered it. You managed it. You offered it to God through modesty and to your husband through obedience. But you did not speak of it. Not at the supper table, not in the barn, not in the whispered dark of a shared bedroom with your sisters breathing beside you. The Ordnung, our unwritten but absolute code, shaped every hour of every day. Gelassenheit, yielding, was the highest virtue a woman could demonstrate. You yielded to God. You yielded to the church. You yielded to your husband. And yielding meant you did not ask questions that the community had decided did not need answers. My school ended for me at 8th grade. After that, my education was entirely practical. I learned to cook for frolics, to sew without a pattern, to birth a calf in the cold dark of a January morning. I could manage a household before I was 15. I could work a full day that would exhaust most grown women in the outside world. But no one ever sat me down and told me what marriage actually meant, what the body actually needed, what I was actually walking into. In my community, courtship moved fast because it was designed to. A boy began giving you buggy rides home from Sunday singings. He visited Sunday evenings. Within months, the community assumed engagement. My courtship lasted barely 5 months. We practiced bundling, lying together on top of the quilt, fully clothed, careful, talking for hours about the life we would build. It felt intimate. It felt like preparation. It was not preparation, not for what came after. Our wedding was on a Thursday in late October after harvest. I had been awake since 4 a.m. Nearly 300 people filled my parents' home and barn. The bishop preached for hours about submission, about yielding, about building a household that honored God. The food was heavy and warm. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, choufle pie that melted sweet on my tongue. By the time the house grew quiet and we went upstairs, my feet were throbbing, my neck ached, my cheeks hurt from smiling at people I barely knew. And underneath all of that exhaustion was something sharper, a fear that had no name because I had never been given the words for it. The room was simple. A wooden bed, a quilt stitched by my aunts, in a wash basin with cool water, a small kerosene lamp throwing soft gold across the walls. No mirror, no lock on the door. Below us, I could still hear boots shifting, a chair scraping, the last voices of the evening. He sat on the edge of the bed and loosened his suspenders. I stood by the window and unpinned my prayer cap. It fell onto the nightstand like a small white flag of surrender. We were 2 teenagers, dressed as adults, standing in a room where everything was expected of us, and nothing had been explained. Here is what I need you to understand. What happened next was not dramatic in the way people imagine. There was no violence, there was no cruelty. He was not a bad man. But there was pain I had not been warned about. There was confusion I had no vocabulary for. There were moments where I wanted to say, "Wait, stop. Something is wrong," but I did not say them because I did not know if something was wrong or if this was simply what marriage felt like. I had been taught my whole life that a wife yields. So I yielded, even when my body was telling me something different, even when every nerve was screaming that something was not right. And the next morning, I put on my apron, went downstairs, and started the stove. If you want to go deeper into the hidden realities of Amish life, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. And if this channel is finding you for the first time, subscribe, like this video, and hit the notification bell. There is so much more here that nobody else is saying out loud. The weeks that followed were the loneliest of my life. Not because I was alone, the community was everywhere, as it always is. Women stopped by. My mother-in-law brought food. There were always dishes to wash, animals to tend, work that filled every hour from before sunrise until long after dark. Amish life does not leave you alone with your thoughts for long. But inside the marriage bed, every night I was completely alone with something I could not name and could not ask anyone about. I want to be precise about this. The pain I experienced in those early weeks of marriage was not extraordinary. It was not unusual. It was, I later learned, almost universal among Amish brides. And it was entirely, completely, practically preventable. I did not know that then. I thought it was the nature of marriage. I thought this was what being a wife meant. I thought my discomfort was either a test of my faithfulness or simply the cost of womanhood, and that other women had paid it quietly before me, and I would pay it quietly now. The theology I had been raised in had 3 pillars that made this silence not just possible, but inevitable. The first was submission. A wife's physical experience inside the marriage was never framed as something that mattered on its own. Her comfort was secondary. Her pain was irrelevant. What mattered was her faithfulness, her availability, her yielding. The second was suffering as virtue. In old order communities, physical hardship is not something you solve. It is something you endure. Endurance equals faithfulness. Seeking relief equals weakness. At worst, seeking relief edges toward hochmut, pride, which in the Amish world is among the gravest sins. The third was silence as modesty. Discussing the body, especially the intimate parts of marriage, was considered immodest before the wedding. Any practical preparation would have required admitting out loud that the wedding night would involve something physical, and that admission alone was already edging toward impropriety. 3 pillars. And together, they built a wall around every Amish bride that sealed her off from the simplest, most practical information that could have changed everything. I found out the truth the way most women in my community found out. Not from my mother, not from the church, from a neighbor. She appeared at my fence one afternoon, 6 weeks into my marriage. She looked left, she looked right. She pressed something into my hand, a small glass jar, plain and unlabeled, and walked away without a word. It took me days to understand what it was and what it was for. When I finally understood, I sat down on the floor of my kitchen and I cried. Not from gratitude, though I was grateful. I cried because of the 6 weeks that had already happened, 6 weeks of pain that did not have to be, 6 weeks of telling myself this was obedience, 6 weeks of silence I had mistaken for faithfulness. The solution had been in my own kitchen cupboard the entire time. That is the moment I first understood that the silence was not protection. It was control. What I did not know then, and only learned years later in therapy after I had left, was how many women around me had lived the same story. Women I had known my whole life, women who had sat beside me at quilting bees and frolics and Sunday services, smiling, quiet, yielding. But one woman I knew had endured 2 full years of pain before an older woman at a work gathering said something that sounded like cooking advice and changed everything. 2 years. She wept when she told me, not about the pain, about the time. All that unnecessary time. Another woman told me she had assumed for the first year of her marriage that something was physically wrong with her, that she was broken in some way, that God had made her body defective. She carried that shame for 12 months before a chance conversation opened a door no one had thought to open for her. These are not edge cases. This is the pattern. Across old order communities, across affiliation lines, from the most conservative Schwarzentreuber districts to more moderate congregations, the preparation gap is nearly universal. That the information withheld is nearly identical. And the damage it causes stretches far beyond the physical. Because here is what nobody talks about when they talk about the Amish wedding night. The pain is one part of it. What it does to a marriage is the other part. The part that lasts. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. Subscribe, like this video, and turn on that notification bell because what comes next is something most people have never heard anyone say out loud. When a young woman spends the first weeks and months of her marriage in pain she cannot name, enduring something she cannot speak about, she does not simply heal when the physical issue is resolved. Something has already been written into the foundation of that marriage. Something about what her experience is worth. And something about whether her body belongs to her or to the institution of the union. Something about whether her voice matters inside the most private space of her life. I loved my husband. I want to say that clearly. He was not cruel. He was not aware of what I was experiencing because I had been taught every single day of my life that saying nothing was faithfulness. And so I said nothing. And so he had no way of knowing. The night I finally told him, we were sitting at the kitchen table after supper. The lamp between us. I had rehearsed the words for days, and they still came out sideways. He looked at me for a long time and said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "Because I didn't know I was allowed to." We sat in silence. The clock on the wall, the horses shifting in the barn outside, his breathing. The lamp throwing long shadows between us. That conversation, 30 minutes of the most honest talking our marriage had ever held, happened only because a neighbor had pressed a jar into my hand over a fence. Everything that should have come before it, from our families, from the church, from the community that had blessed our union and called it holy, had produced only silence. And that silence had cost us something we could not fully name and could not fully get back. My therapist, years after I left, said something I have turned over in my mind every day since. She said, "Control doesn't always look like a locked door. Sometimes it looks like information that was never given." I have thought about every woman I knew who walked into a marriage carrying nothing but a dress and a prayer cap, and a lifetime of being told that asking questions was a sin. I have thought about what it means to hand a 17-year-old girl an entire life of adult responsibility and strip away the most basic knowledge she would need to live it with dignity. The Amish world gave me things I will carry forever, a community so deep it has a texture you can feel, a faith that, though wounded and complicated, was real, a work ethic that has carried me through every hard year since I left. I am not telling this story to burn down what I came from. I am telling it because there is no theology that requires a woman to suffer unnecessarily inside her own marriage bed. And there is no scripture that consecrates her pain as holy. There is no version of Gelassenheit, of yielding, that was ever meant to mean this. The silence was not modesty. It was not protection. It was a system that depended on women not knowing, because women who do not know cannot choose differently, cannot ask for more, cannot name what is being taken from them. And the marriages that broke under that silence, the ones that started in confusion and pain and shame, and never fully recovered the trust that should have been there from the beginning, those are the cost, not just the wedding night, the marriage, the years, the person you become when you spend the most intimate parts of your life convinced that your body's needs are not worth speaking aloud. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. subscribe, like this video, and ring that notification bell. I have so many more truths waiting, and this community is growing because of people like you who believe these stories deserve to be heard. I grieve the girl who stood at that upstairs window unpinning her prayer cap, who had been told her whole life that she was ready because she could cook for 300 people and manage a household and endure hard work without complaint. She was not ready, not because she was weak, but because no one had given her the tools she needed. Readiness is not the same as obedience. Maturity is not the same as endurance. And a young woman who has never been allowed to understand her own body is not prepared for marriage, no matter how perfectly she can bake a choufle pie or how steadily she can walk in a plain dress. If you grew up in a world where your silence was called faithfulness, I see you. If you were handed adult responsibility and told that made you an adult, I see you. If you spent the earliest days of your marriage enduring something you could not name in a silence you believed was required of you, you were not wrong for what you felt. You were not broken. You were not faithless. You were a young woman who deserved information and was given none, who deserved preparation and was given silence, who deserved to know that her body mattered, that her experience inside her own life mattered, and was taught instead to yield and endure and never, ever ask. I wasn't too young to run a household. I was too young to know I was allowed to speak. If this story reached something in you, leave me a comment. Tell me what part stayed with you. Tell me your story if you are ready, and if you want to keep hearing from behind the prayer cap, subscribe to this channel. There is still so much I have not said. Until next time, choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life.